Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much to Councilwoman Miller for being a faithful ally in the work of social justice and for standing up for our communities. Thank you to Mr. Eugene Monteiro, who has served as an extraordinary investigator for PERA, who's here with me. And thank you to all of you for being here on this beautiful November afternoon, as much as it doesn't look like it.
Can't hear you.
Today, I want to talk about, I'm going to try to speak up a little bit, okay? Today, I want to talk about my tenure as the executive director of our city's civilian oversight panel. I want to tell the truth and the whole truth, both that seem obvious and not. I think the simplest way for me to do that is to talk about at least 3 stories. One of my best days at PERA, one of my worst days at PERA, and ultimately the straw that broke the camel's back and resulted in my decision to release the videos that I have released today. For most of my tenure, the work that PERA has done has taken place behind the scenes, not as an effort to hide the truth from the public, but as an understanding that sometimes you need a buffer to deal with sensitive and complicated material. PERA has been willing to be a partner, to cooperate, and to give deference to the Providence Police Department so that we can achieve that justice. As I've explained multiple times, civilian oversight is not new, and it is not exclusive to Providence. One of the first things the PERA board did, even before it hired me, was to become part of NACO, the National Association for the Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And a lot of the work that I've done is to try to connect to the greater practices that are taking place in every corner of this country, from San Francisco to Wisconsin to Miami-Dade and Minnesota. Indeed, the work of PERA is not new. Many of you know that this is the second iteration of PERA. And although my job has been to try to build an airplane while flying it, there is precedent in the city of Providence. The original PERA board came about in the early 2000s. Many city activists came together in the tragic aftermath of the killing of Sergeant Cornell Young Jr. The person who today, for example, is Councilwoman Mary Kay Harris, was one of the forefront leaders in that fight. And even long before the early 2000s, in the 1970s, Michael Van Leesten, the late, great Michael Van Leesten, somebody that I had the honor to know and work with and meet with even a couple months before his death. The last time we met was at Olga's Cup and Saucer downtown, and I had the opportunity, I see some of you have been to Olga's, and I had the opportunity to learn from him. What was it like to be an African-American man in the city of Providence in the 1970s? He told me what it was like to have to call New York City to find an attorney who would take his case and file a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Providence that would ultimately result in a consent decree and serve as the foundation of civilian oversight. We are not here alone. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we stand for the honest work of police oversight. Before I tell you about the 3 specific stories that I mentioned earlier, and ultimately my decision to release the videos today, I want to tell you and be very clear about the things that I am not saying, just as clearly as the things that I am saying. I want to acknowledge Attorney General Peter Nerona and Commissioner of Police Stephen Perry. I've had many conversations with each of them, particularly Commissioner Perry, in my tenure as Executive Director. Indeed, I had conversations with both of them as recently as this morning, and I am pleased to report that they were honest, productive, respectful, patient conversations, and I believe both Commissioner Perry and Attorney General Nerona are good and decent men who are working hard to try to exercise the best judgment possible. However, when it comes to the release of the videos that took place on April 19 in this city involving Sgt. Henry, we have a firm disagreement. Those videos are public records. And today I decided to honor a couple of the public requests that I had received, specifically to the Providence Journal, and I believe Uprise, Rhode Island will also be publishing those videos today. Why did I release them? First and foremost, I want the public to know that I did not make this decision frivolously. I didn't make it quickly. I didn't make it rashly. I thought long and hard for several months, and I tried to exercise each and every tool at my disposal before reaching this point. And if I had to be specific about the reason why I released them, not only because they're public records, not only because I had the discretion to do it in my capacity, but I want to highlight something that Councilwoman Rachel Miller says. We need to have difficult conversations. And I know that because I've engaged in many of them with the police department. The first story I want to tell you is about my best day, one of my best days at PERA. March 19, 2019. I was just about 3 weeks into my tenure as executive director, and it was the first time that I was invited to go to the Providence Police Department. I had the opportunity to meet with extraordinary men and women who serve our city and put their lives on the line. People like Major Oscar Perez and Captain Alyssa DeAndre, and obviously Chief Hugh Clements. I've met many people at the Providence Police Department that I deeply admire and appreciate and respect, including the three that I just mentioned. And I know that each of them would pick up the phone if I call and spend 30 or sometimes 40 minutes with me to discuss virtually anything. And I'm grateful for them, grateful to them for that. During that day, I not only had the opportunity to tour the building and speak to different people. There was one scene actually where, as I was being toured around the building, I was brought through a door accidentally that we weren't supposed to cross. And I actually stumbled upon a group of the finest Providence police officers debriefing what had been a hostage incident the night before. The day that I walked into the Providence Police Department on that day, March 19th, unbeknownst to the public, the Providence Police had been working the entire night to de-escalate a hostage situation. And they did it without any incident. They were able to save not only the survivors, but they were able to arrest the perpetrators without any incident to them. The story didn't even make the front page of the news, and it was a solemn reminder for me of the work that the Providence Police Department does to keep us safe every day that often goes unnoticed. Like many of you, I'm a resident of the city, and I've been a lifelong resident of here, the South Side. I appreciate and honor and respect the work that the police department does. I've seen how they saved babies that were suffocated and worked expeditiously to bring to justice people accused of vicious acts like child molestation. I appreciate those things. I recognize those things. And what I'm advocating for in transparency from the city is not mutually exclusive from the extraordinary work that they do. And so I would put that day, March 19, and all the things that I learned that day and all the things that I saw as one of the greatest days. Another great day was when I got to speak to the police academy and got to look into the eyes of the men and women who were preparing to serve the city of Providence and thank them for their service. But just like I have so many great stories of great interactions with people that I admire and respect, there are troubling things that have happened in our city, perpetrated by some of the same men and women, human beings that have tempers and make mistakes like the rest of us. Police officers are not superhuman, nor are they people who are capable of no good. If we are able to have this conversation, the way we must have this conversation is to use the word and. It's not either or, it's and. I deeply respect the people that I've mentioned, and I have grave disagreements with them. I have great concerns about some of the things that happen in our city, and I appreciate the great work that takes place. So the point of today is not to close the door on conversation, as I feel some of the members of our city and law enforcement have done. but it's to open the doors of conversation, because as Councilwoman Miller says, only when we engage in difficult conversations will we be able to actually solve these problems. Problems that have been brought to light across the country and in our own backyard. The second day I wanted to tell you about, as soon as this car drives by, was one of the worst days in my tenure as executive director. That day was March 29th of this year, 2020. It was the first time that I was shown the video that has been now released to the public, and the incident of Sgt. Henry. From the first moment I saw this video, I was immediately troubled, and I thought that it should go to the public. I thought for a day or two, and I asked myself, what should I do with this information? Should I release it immediately? Should I talk about it immediately? Or should I invest in the process that is PERA? Should I use the tools at my disposal and try to show whether the system works or doesn't? And I opted for the latter. I tried to do things the right way. To the extent that anybody blames me or says that I am not trustworthy for releasing this video, I would point to the entirety of my tenure as executive director to show that this is a once in a 10-year kind of thing. I've known about this video since late May, and I possessed it via subpoena since August. And I have, during that time, exercised every single channel at my disposal to try to bring this information to the public. On June 1, for the first time, I invoked subsection H2 of the PERA statute and asked my investigator to conduct an independent review of the investigation done by the police department. A couple of weeks later, that investigator spoke to the PERA board, and our collective reaction was of alarm. And we asked the city to provide the PERA board, the entire PERA board, with a briefing so that every single member of the PERA board could have an opportunity to see this video and to make their own decisions. Initially, the city said no, and they forced us to get a subpoena, a process that I believe was deeply unnecessary. But we did get the subpoena. And by the time we got to late July, early August, the city finally agreed. I thank the city council for issuing the subpoena and ultimately to providing the video to PERA. On August 4, Commissioner Perry gave the PERA board a briefing and played the video for us in executive session and answered questions to his credit, which I appreciate. At that point, I thought that we were going to release the video, and I asked the board to release the video. Sadly, the board voted no. Not only did the board vote no, but my advocacy for the release of this video set a chain reaction of events to take place. Rather than look into this case, the board decided to investigate me. Rather to review the police, the board tried to defund our investigator. Similar to the law enforcement officials and city officials that I described an appreciation for, I do respect and appreciate every single person on the board. And the fact that they are volunteers who give their time and I believe sincerely want to try to make the city better. Unfortunately, I disagree with a lot of what's happened, and it's been increasingly frustrating and increasingly disappointing ever since I began to advocate for the release of this video. I had positive and productive working relationships with almost everybody on the board. But the more I advocated the release of this video, the worse those relationships began to deteriorate. And that is something that I think is unfortunate. I stand ready, willing, and able today to work with the board, to do the real work of civilian oversight, to be a truly independent body, and to not depend on the city law department or city leaders to tell us what is and what is not okay. And that is what today is about. Having that conversation and calling on not only law enforcement to cooperate with us in the city, to empower us, but on the board to do its job and to do even the basic things like funding our investigators. If you ask me, strike that. There are many things that people will criticize me for, things that we have not been able to do. Although we've received upwards of 40 complaints, we have not been able to conclude an investigation in one. And part of the reason is because of all of the hurdles and challenges that we've had to deal with. Some of those hurdles and challenges are real. Some are discretionary. And I call on the city to engage in open conversation about what these things mean and to interpret the laws in a way that is consistent with the purpose of what PERA is supposed to do. Last, I want to talk about the straw that broke the camel's back and my ultimate decision to release these videos. Some of you know that the most recent high-profile case that took place in Providence took place on October 18th. And it involved the collision of a moped on Elmwood Avenue. About a week and a half prior to that, PERA finally was able to release the investigative report in the Hanley case, the case involving Sgt. Henry. Evidence that even as far as late September, we were still chugging along, little by little, but putting one foot in front of the other to try to bring the truth to the public. On October 18th, just as all of you, I watched with shock and dismay as to the evidence that unfolded on Elmwood Avenue. Again, I want to be clear. I don't know the facts of what happened on October 18th, and the police department deserves to do an investigation into the facts so that we can know what happened. But PERA must be at that table. And the reason why is not just some theoretical argument that I made up. Look what happened in the Hanley case. The reason why I'm releasing these videos to the public is to show the discrepancy between the perspective of a law enforcement official and a law enforcement department and a civilian agency staffed with attorneys and people with extraordinary reputations such as Eugene Monteiro. Let me be clear. I am not calling the police department or Commissioner Perry liars. I am not calling them racist. I am not calling for the defunding of the police, and in no way, shape, or form do I condone violence of any form. Part of me feels that those things are obvious that I shouldn't have to say them. But to the extent that there's any question about what I'm saying, I don't want my words to be used or to be misinterpreted. And so let me be as clear as possible. When I saw the videos of the October 18 incident, I thought that this could be an opportunity for us to learn from what we learned in the Sgt. Henry investigation. Because PERA was able to methodically and professionally and respectfully highlight the differences between what the law enforcement community highlighted and what we thought was important, I was hoping that we would be invited to the table in real time. Again, let me be clear. The police department is willing to provide us with information regarding the October 18 incident. But they're willing to provide us with information that they choose, when they choose, how they choose. And I no longer have the privilege of thinking that that is okay. Again, I'm not calling you liars. I don't mean it to disrespectfully question anybody's judgment. We're talking about lives, and we're talking about law. And we're talking about an organization that has been trying for almost 2 years to establish a process with which to do this. And so since I have exhausted all of my avenues to do this under the law that exists, I decided to do what I did today and call this press conference to inform the public of what has transpired over my tenure. The good, the bad, the obvious, the uncomfortable, and ultimately what is left to be decided. I don't have all of the answers, and it is possible, conceivable, that we could redo this all over, the investigations and the like, include the civilian perspective and still arrive at the same conclusions. But the importance is not the conclusion, it's the process. And the civilians must be at the table. I agree, we need to think about how we do that. We need to think about what the laws and the procedures are. We need to create a process and have that transparency. And I was frustrated in the October 18 incident to watch 3 consecutive press conferences from my home and to hear leaders of our city call for transparency and professionalism and a complete investigation. And my emails and phone calls were unanswered. And so I'm calling on the city. I'm calling on the PERA board. I'm calling on the law enforcement community. Trust us. Ultimately, it's the people that govern. The people choose who their leaders are. And the people have a right to know how they're being policed and what happens as a consequence. And if you ask me what my proudest achievement is at PERA, even though we have stumbled, and even though we have struggled, it is number one, highlighting the flaws in the process and how we've tried to do things under the law that exists and we've been continuously stonewalled. And so part of my call is to call on the city to amend the city ordinances that govern us and to give us the power and the teeth that we need to be able to do this work. And the second thing that I'm proud of is the team that I assembled. PERA has a $300,000 budget, and this is before coronavirus. And we're being asked to conduct oversight of an agency that has $90 million. I cannot do the work alone. The two people that I've asked to be part of my team include Eugene Monteiro, who's sitting here to my left, an African-American man who was born and raised in this city, somebody who's been the survivor of police violence himself, somebody who has deep relationships, not just in the community, but in the police department. Sometimes I get frustrated walking in there with them because we have to stop every 5 minutes because he wants to chat with everybody. In that sense, he's a unicorn. Somebody who's able to actually have the trust and collaboration of both communities. How can you not trust us? For the mediation side, somebody who's not here today, I retain the services of a professional mediator out of Boston, somebody named Sheila Hubbard, who has decades of experience and Ivy League training. And so, as much as I may have put my own job in jeopardy today, I want the record to be clear and to reflect. I put a team forward that was able to do this work. I was committed to doing things the right way, and I still believe I'm doing things the right way. I'm not breaking any law. I may have gone against what the board decided, and the board voting not to release this video. And to that, I have faced each and every board member, and I will continue to, and will continue to be happy to work with them. But to the extent that we have tried to work within the four corners of the statute, what I'm saying to the city is we need more. And what I'm saying to the police department is that we, PERA, deserve more. Don't end the conversation. Don't just tell us that we can't be part of the table. Can't have a seat at the table of our own city. Work with us. Tell us your concerns. I'm reasonable. I'm open-minded. I'm a professional. I'm somebody who loves this city and plans on being here for the rest of my life. And so if I say anything today, is that I've released this video not as a way to end the conversation, but as a way to begin it. I've had many conversations as a police department, and I feel confident in saying that we agree on most issues. But our agreements do us no good if we turn away from each other when it gets difficult. And so that's what I'm calling on the city to do today. I appreciate all of you and your time for supporting PERA, for listening to PERA, for reporting on PERA, and I would be happy to take any questions that you have.